Alex and Jordan were inseparable to teens with a bond everyone envied, but behind Alex's quiet demeanor and Jordan's infectious energy lay a dark tension no one saw coming. A tension that would explode into a shocking murder that rocked their small town and left the community questioning how well they really knew their children. At first, everything seemed perfectly normal in the quiet suburban town of Maplewood. The streets were lined with neatly kept houses, children rode their bikes on weekends, and neighbors knew each other by name. High school was the center of teenage life, full of sports games, weekend hangouts, and endless chatter about grades, fashion, and crushes. Among the students were two boys who, on the surface, could not have been more different. Jordan was outgoing, confident, and instantly liked by everyone he met. His laughter was infectious, and his energy seemed limitless. Alex, on the other hand, was quiet and reserved. He spent most of his time reading, studying, or playing video games in his room. Despite their differences, the two had formed an unlikely friendship that had lasted for years. They complemented each other in ways no one else could understand. Jordan encouraged Alex to step out of his shell, and Alex offered Jordan a sense of calm and stability he rarely found elsewhere. Then came the acne. For Alex, teenage years had been complicated not just by school pressures and social anxiety, but by a stubborn case of persistent acne. No creams, washes, or natural remedies seemed to work. Finally, after several visits to a dermatologist, he was prescribed a strong medication designed to clear up the stubborn breakouts. At first, Alex was hopeful. The idea of finally feeling confident in his own skin lifted his spirits. However, within a few weeks, subtle changes began to appear. Friends noticed that he seemed withdrawn, often staring off into space during conversations. His parents worried as he became irritable over minor issues, snapping at people he normally got along with. Neighbors noticed strange behavior too. Alex would sometimes sit in his room with the blinds drawn, muttering to himself or writing frantically in a journal. The light-hearted, if quiet, boy they thought they knew seemed to be fading away. Even Jordan noticed a shift in his friend, though he tried to brush it off as stress from school or the pressure of exams. Despite these changes, life in Maplewood carried on. Teenagers went to football games, families hosted barbecues, and the town remained largely peaceful. But that peace shattered on one rainy afternoon. Jordan was found dead in his bedroom, and the small town was instantly gripped by horror. The news spread like wildfire. People couldn't understand how someone so full of life could meet such a sudden, violent end. Rumors began to circulate, questions multiplied, and the police quickly began an investigation that would uncover secrets no one expected. Alex, the quiet boy who had once seemed so harmless, became the focus of that investigation. Neighbors whispered, friends speculated, and the town felt a mixture of fear and disbelief. Everyone struggled to reconcile the friendly, studious teenager they thought they knew with the shocking reality that he was now at the center of a murder case. The tragedy left families mourning, classmates confused, and the community questioning everything about trust, friendship, and the hidden struggles that can lie behind even the most ordinary faces. In a town where nothing like this had ever happened before, Maplewood was forced to confront a terrifying question: how well can anyone truly know the people around them? As the investigation into Jordan's death began, suspicion quickly fell on Alex. The evidence, while circumstantial at first, was troubling. Police discovered that Alex had been the last person to see Jordan alive. He had visited Jordan's house earlier that afternoon, claiming he wanted to discuss school work, but no one could explain why the meeting had turned fatal. The town was in shock, unable to reconcile the image of Alex as a quiet, studious teenager with the idea that he could be capable of harming his best friend. When authorities confronted him, Alex's explanation was as unexpected as it was alarming. He claimed that the acne medication he had been taking had caused him to lose control. This explanation left investigators stunned. Could a drug designed to treat skin problems actually trigger violent behavior? Medical experts were brought in to examine the claim. They reviewed the prescription and its known side effects, which included mood swings, depression, and anxiety in rare cases, but nothing suggested homicidal tendencies. Some experts expressed concern that severe psychological reactions could occur under extreme circumstances, but the link Alex suggested was unprecedented. Despite this, he insisted, maintaining that he had not meant to hurt Jordan and that the drug had somehow manipulated his thoughts and actions. The media quickly seized on the story. Headlines painted it as a bizarre and cautionary tale. Acne medication allegedly behind teen murder, and Maplewood teen claims drug made him kill. The town became obsessed with the idea that a common, everyday medication could be responsible for such a horrifying act. Parents began scrutinizing their children's prescriptions, and discussions about the influence of drugs on mental health filled community forums. Friends and neighbors were torn. Some wanted to believe Alex, holding on to the hope that his actions had been unintentional, while others found the notion impossible to accept. Investigators dug deeper, examining Alex's recent behavior, online activity, and personal relationships. They discovered that, while his story pointed to the medication, there were other factors that suggested a more complicated reality. Alex had been increasingly isolated, writing in journals about frustrations, feelings of inadequacy, and even jealousy toward Jordan. He had spent hours online researching not only the acne drug, but also other substances and ways to manage anger, raising questions about whether the medication was truly the cause or just a convenient scapegoat. Community members struggled with the growing tension. School administrators held meetings, counselors tried to reach out to students, and families questioned how well they truly knew their own children. Everyone was searching for an explanation, for a reason that could make sense of the senseless. Meanwhile, the police continued to gather evidence, interviews, and forensic reports, all while the town watched and waited. The combination of fear, confusion, and curiosity created an atmosphere charged with anxiety. As the investigation progressed, Alex's claim about the acne medication remained central to the debate. Some experts were cautiously sympathetic, acknowledging that extreme side effects, though rare, could influence behavior. Others dismissed it entirely, pointing to patterns of premeditation and intent that could not be explained away by a prescription. The community was left in a state of unease, unable to settle on the truth. Every new revelation added layers of complexity, leaving Maplewood gripped by a chilling question: had a simple acne drug triggered a horrific crime, or had something far more deliberate been at play? The courtroom was filled with tension when the trial began. A mix of curious onlookers, reporters, and friends of the victim all gathered to witness the unfolding drama. From the very first day, the case was anything but ordinary. Prosecutors painted a chilling picture, showing the jury that Alex's story about the acne medication might not be the full truth. They presented evidence suggesting planning and forethought, pointing to inconsistencies in his statements and gaps in his timeline. They highlighted his online activity, showing searches for ways to harm someone and detailed research into substances that could cause physical harm. The evidence suggested more than just an impulsive reaction, it pointed to deliberate intent. The defense team, however, remained focused on the acne drug. They brought in medical experts to testify about potential side effects, emphasizing mood swings, depression, and rare but extreme cases of psychological distress. They argued that Alex's judgment had been impaired and that he was not fully responsible for his actions at the time of the murder. The courtroom listened carefully as psychiatrists debated his mental state, each presenting conflicting interpretations. Some argued that the medication had played a significant role, while others insisted that the teen had exhibited warning signs of aggression and jealousy long before the prescription. As the trial progressed, more surprising details emerged. Investigators revealed Alex's journals, which contained passages reflecting frustration, resentment, and envy toward Jordan. These entries suggested that his feelings had been building over months, even years, and that the acne drug might have been a convenient excuse rather than the cause of his actions. Digital evidence painted a complex picture. Alex had researched not only the effects of the medication but also methods of harming someone without leaving immediate evidence. The prosecution used this information to suggest premeditation, a calculated plan disguised as the influence of a drug. The media coverage added another layer of intensity. Reporters described the trial as one of the most unusual and disturbing cases in recent memory. Headlines highlighted the tension between teenage vulnerability and criminal responsibility, framing Alex as both a product of circumstance and a deliberate manipulator. Community members followed each day closely, many attending in person as every witness, expert, and piece of evidence was presented and analyzed. The town seemed to hold its collective breath, trying to reconcile the quiet, studious boy they thought they knew with the potential for something far darker. In the courtroom, every detail mattered. Prosecutors emphasized inconsistencies in Alex's explanations and highlighted attempts to shift blame, showing that he had communicated with peers in ways that could suggest manipulation. Defense attorneys countered with psychological analysis, painting a picture of a teenager struggling with side effects he could not control. The debate between intent and influence, personal responsibility, and external factors continued to unfold in real time, keeping the courtroom on edge and the public captivated. By the end of the chapter of testimony, it was clear that the trial was far from straightforward. Alex's claim about the acne drug remained central, yet the evidence hinted at something deeper, something more intentional. Each piece of information added tension, uncertainty, and complexity, leaving the jury and the community to grapple with difficult questions. The trial was not just about a single murder. It was about understanding the mind of a teenager, the limits of responsibility, and the unsettling possibility that even ordinary medications could become entangled with extraordinary tragedy. The courtroom grew even more charged as the trial entered its most intense phase. Prosecutors moved aggressively to dismantle Alex's defense, focusing on evidence that contradicted his claims about the acne medication. They presented messages, notes, and online searches that suggested careful planning rather than a spontaneous act caused by external influences. Every detail seemed to work against Alex, revealing a side of him that few in Maplewood had suspected. The jury watched closely as each piece of evidence was laid bare, and the tension in the room was palpable. Friends of Jordan and neighbors who had known Alex struggled to reconcile the quiet, withdrawn teenager they had seen with the increasingly disturbing portrait emerging in court. The prosecution highlighted patterns in Alex's behavior that suggested premeditation. Experts testified that while side effects from medication could influence mood and behavior, they could not explain deliberate actions taken over time, such as preparing tools, researching methods, and documenting thoughts in journals. The jury was shown pages from these journals filled with resentment, jealousy, and detailed accounts of Alex's frustrations with Jordan and with his own life. Each entry seemed to undermine the claim that he had acted purely under the influence of a drug. The narrative of an accidental crime began to unravel, replaced by the chilling possibility of calculated intent. As the trial unfolded, another shocking revelation emerged. The prosecution revealed that Alex had attempted to manipulate evidence and create false narratives to support his story. Investigators uncovered fabricated texts and altered records that appeared to corroborate his claim that the acne drug had triggered his actions. This revelation stunned the courtroom. Attempting to manufacture evidence not only damaged his credibility but also suggested a level of cunning and awareness that ran counter to the argument that he had been temporarily overcome by medication. The jury and spectators were left to confront a new reality. Alex had taken active steps to influence the investigation and shape perceptions of his guilt. The defense continued to argue that psychological stress combined with the medication created a temporary state of impaired judgment, but the prosecution countered with detailed forensic analysis and expert testimony. They emphasized that the timing of the entries, searches, and actions demonstrated thoughtfulness and deliberation rather than impulsive behavior. As each expert spoke, the courtroom seemed to shift, the initial sympathy some had felt for Alex slowly giving way to doubt and unease. Every detail of the evidence, from online activity to journal entries, reinforced the image of a teenager aware of his actions and attempting to escape full accountability. By the time closing arguments approached, the atmosphere in the courtroom was electric. Every day of testimony had added layers of tension and revelation. The community, glued to media coverage and courtroom updates, struggled to process the complex interplay between adolescence, psychological strain, and calculated violence. What had begun as a tragic and shocking claim about a medication now appeared to be part of a far more intricate and deliberate story. The courtroom had become a stage for a battle not only over guilt and innocence, but also over the deeper questions of human behavior, responsibility, and the unexpected darkness that can exist behind familiar faces. The trial had exposed secrets, lies, and truths that no one could have anticipated, leaving everyone waiting for the final, inevitable conclusion. After weeks of tense testimony, the trial finally reached its conclusion. The courtroom was packed, the air thick people with anticipation as the jury prepared to deliberate. Families of both Jordan and Alex sat quietly, their faces reflecting grief, anxiety, and the strain of witnessing every detail of the case unfold. Friends of Jordan were still in shock, trying to process the tragedy that had destroyed someone they had loved and admired. The small town of Maplewood seemed to hold its breath, as if waiting for the final decision to release them from the uncertainty that had gripped the community for months. The jury spent hours reviewing the evidence, weighing the testimony of experts, and considering Alex's explanations. They examined the digital footprints, the journal entries, and the testimony about the attempted manipulation of evidence. Every detail seemed to point toward one conclusion, yet the defense's arguments about the acne medication and its possible effects lingered in the background. The tension was palpable, not just in the courtroom but throughout the town, where people followed updates with a mix of fear and curiosity. When the verdict was finally read, the courtroom erupted with a mix of relief, shock, and raw emotion. Alex was found guilty of first-degree murder. The words echoed through the room, leaving no doubt about the severity of the crime and the responsibility placed on his shoulders. Families wept quietly, friends of the victim expressed a mixture of grief and vindication, and the small audience of onlookers seemed stunned by the finality of the decision. The jury's conclusion confirmed what many had begun to suspect during the trial, that the acne drug, while potentially influential in mood, could not excuse the deliberate choices that led to Jordan's death. In the days and weeks that followed, the town struggled to process the aftermath. Conversations among parents, teenagers, and community leaders turned toward questions of mental health, accountability, and the complex pressures facing adolescents. Maplewood had never experienced anything like this, and the shock lingered, casting a shadow over the ordinary routines of daily life. Memorials for Jordan appeared around the community, scholarships in his name, gatherings at the school, and small tributes left at local parks allowing people to honor the life that had been lost and to remember his energy, charm, and warmth. At the same time, discussions about Alex's case spread beyond Maplewood, sparking debates nationwide. News outlets and social media platforms dissected the role of medication, teenage psychology, and the ways that hidden emotions can erupt into violence. Experts debated the signs that might have been missed and the ways communities could better support young people facing intense internal struggles. The story became a cautionary tale, not only about the dangers of unchecked anger and jealousy, but also about the limits of blaming external factors for violent actions. Maplewood slowly began to heal, though the memory of the tragedy remained. Parents paid closer attention to the emotional well-being of their children. Schools introduced programs to teach coping and communication skills, and the community sought ways to prevent another devastating event. Jordan's absence was felt every day, yet his memory inspired reflection, vigilance, and a renewed sense of care among those who knew him. The trial had ended, but the lessons it left behind continued to resonate, a stark reminder of how ordinary lives can be shattered by unforeseen darkness and the difficult choices that follow in its wake.